All right, section 7.5, the first example we're going to look at asks us to find the slope-intercept equation when the slope is 8.6 and the y-intercept is 0, -9. There are other ways to do this, but I'm going, just for consistency's sake, going to do most of these the same exact way. So we're going to start with this point slope form, y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. And anytime it asks us to find the equation, typically you can go ahead and start with this formula. M is going to be the slope, so that since they tell us the slope is 8.6, we're actually going to replace m with 8.6. And this point, the y-intercept 0, -9, this first number in our ordered pair is always going to be x. The second one is always going to be y. Since we're only given one ordered pair, this is going to be x1 and y1, and we're just going to plug those values in. Only going to replace the y1, m, and the x1 in this formula. So when we go to our next step, let's go ahead and bring this up a little bit. We've got y minus and y1 is this -9, so we want to subtract -9, and then equals m we know is 8.6, and then we'll multiply that times x minus x1, which was 0. So a couple things we can do here. We know that anytime you subtract a negative, that becomes positive, so that's +9, and then we can distribute this 8.6 to both of those terms. So that's going to be 8.6x, and then 8.6 times -0 is just 0, so we don't need to write that term. And last up, we do want to take one step to get the y by itself, so we're going to subtract 9 from both sides. And then bring down the equal sign on the left, we've got y on the right. Be careful you don't put the 8.6 and the 9 together. These are not like terms. So we've got 8.6x minus 9, and that ends up being our solution. Next up, find the slope-intercept equation of m equals 6, and it goes through that point 6, 5. So again, when we're looking for an equation, we're going to write it. Y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1, and we're just going to replace a few things on this. The y1, the m, and the x1. M, they tell us, is 6. Keep in mind that's the slope. And this 6 and 5, that's going to be x and y. So since we only have one pair, that's going to be x1 and y1. y1, which is 5, equals m, which we know is 6. And then x minus x1, which we know is 6 also. From there, we'll just distribute that 6 to the x and to the -6. So we've got y minus 5 equals 6 times x, and then 6 times -6. And then our last step is just to get the y by itself, so we need to get rid of that -5. And I'm going to put +5 underneath that 36, since those two are like terms. And that's it for that problem. Y equals 6x minus 31. Our third example, find an equation given the pair of points. And again, we want to find an equation. So we're going to use that y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. And we're going to replace y1, m, and x1. These 2 points that we're given, the 2, 3, and the 6, 5, they're always x, y. They're always in that order, and then x, y again. This first pair, we'll go ahead and let that be the first pair, and the second pair go ahead and let that be the second pair. So with this part here, we do know y1, that's going to be our 3. And we do know x1, that's going to be our 2. But we don't know m, that's the thing that we don't know. So we've got to find m. That's the only thing that we don't know that we're trying to replace. So anytime we're given two ordered pairs, we can use the slope formula, y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1, and we'll just use the 2 points that we've been given to figure that out. So we've got that equals y2, which is 5, minus y1, which is 3, over x2, which is 6, minus x1, which is 2. So ultimately we end up with 2 over 4, or if we reduce that, 1/2. So that's going to be our m. So we can go ahead and plug that back in our original formula there. So we know m now is 1/2, and our y1 and x1 are 2 and 3. So we've got y minus our y1, which is 3, our m, which was 1/2, and then x minus our x1, which is 2. Then we're just solving this. Going to distribute that 1/2. So we've got y minus 3 equals 1/2 times x. And then 1/2 times negative 2. Our sign's going to be negative. And half of 2 is pretty simple. Half of 2 is just 1. Add 3 to both sides in order to get the y by itself. Bring down the equals. Y equals 1/2 x, and then negative 1 plus 3, positive 2. Next up, write an equation of the line containing the point and parallel to the given line. So we know it goes through this point, and we know it's parallel to this equation, parallel to the given line. So one thing we want to consider about that is that anytime we've got two lines that are parallel, that means they're, let's use a different color here, slopes are the same. So we know that our equation goes through this point, only we don't know what our slope is. So since it does say we're going to write an equation, we do need a y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. Our y1 is just going to be our y1 from that point there. Our x is going to be our x from that point, only we don't know our m. So if we know that the slopes are the same, we know that whatever the slope of this one is, whatever the slope of that one is, our slope is the same. So if we can figure out the slope of this one, we know that our m will be exactly the same. Our slope will be exactly the same. So just looking at this, x plus 5y equals 2. We can't tell the slope just by looking at it. What we've got to do is isolate y. So got to do a little bit of work to isolate y. We need to get rid of this x. So now we've got 5y equals, and then be careful, the 2 and the negative x, those don't go together. So negative x and then a positive 2. And then our last step, just divide 5 on both sides. So those cancel out. We're left with, let's see, y equals, and there's a 1 in front of that x there. So this is negative 1 over 5x plus 2 over 5. So be careful that we don't do all that work and then forget why we did it. because the whole reason was to find the slope. So if this negative 1/5, the number in front of x, is the slope of this line, our line is parallel to this, so our slope is the same. So if we go back up, this is negative 1/5. If we go back up over here, we know our slope is negative 1/5 because they're parallel. And the y1, we can go ahead and plug that in. Y1 is going to be 6. X1 is going to be 5, and we'll just fill in the rest. Negative 1/5 times negative 5, that's going to be positive 5 over 5, which is 1. Then we want to get the y by itself, so we're just going to add 6. And then all done. And last up, basically doing the same thing. They want us to write an equation of the given line. So we are going to shrink this a bit. We are going to use that formula, y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. Anytime they ask us to write an equation. So we're going to replace the y1, m, and the x1. We know our y1, that comes from that point that we're going through, and our x1 comes from that too. And this one's a little bit different because they tell us that we are perpendicular to the given line. So we're perpendicular to this one. So perpendicular slopes are reciprocals with opposite signs, meaning if one of them is positive, the other one's negative. So if since we know what our x1 is going to be, that's going to be 2. And let me go back. We know what our y1 is going to be, that's going to be 8, and we know what our x1 is going to be, that's going to be 2. We just don't know what our m is until we find the slope of the given line. So we got 5x plus y equals 9. We want to isolate y. And once y is by itself, then we can figure out what the slope is. So all we've got to do in this case is subtract 5x. That's going to get y all by itself. So now we've got y equals negative 5x, and that's a positive 9. So we know that the slope is negative 5, but our slope is perpendicular to this line. So our slope is perpendicular. So if that one's negative 5, and I'll write that over here, in reality that's negative 5 over 1. So our slope is perpendicular, so it's the reciprocal, so we're just going to flip that, 1 over 5. And since that slope is negative, our slope is positive. So that's what our slope is going to be. So if we go back, we now know what our m is, and we figured out that our m, and I'll use pink this time, our m is 1 over 5. Distribute that 1/5, and we get 1/5 times x. 1/5 times negative 2 is negative 2/5. And then our last step is to get the y by itself. So we're going to add 8. Put a line underneath. We've got y equals 1/5 x. And then 2/5 and 8. That denominator of the 8 is 1, so we need it to have a denominator of 5 in order to add those two fractions. So multiply that by 5. We get minus 2/5 plus 40 over 5. That is what this turns into when we multiply those. 8 times 5 is 40, 1 times 5 is 5. Now we can put these two fraction parts together and we get y equals 1/5 x, and then negative 2 plus 40 is positive 38, and then over 5.